You are listening to Be Amplified, the podcast with Brie and Thais, episode number 33. Hey Amplifiers, welcome to Be Amplified, the podcast. My name is Thais.
And I'm Bree Seeley. We are the co-founders of the Amplify Collective,
a movement aimed at radically disrupting how purpose-driven women connect and operate in the world.
Because we believe it's not just what you do, but who you are that matters.
Each week, join us for messages and interviews that will leave you feeling amplified and ready to change the world.
Let's do this.
It is yet another week of Be Amplified, the podcast with your hosts,
Brie and Thais.
Hi.
Hi. Hello. Hello.
Hey, guys.
Wait, why do you get to go first again? Is it alphabetical order? I kind of like
I'm
Thais
the president,
and Brie
don't you
more.
remember?
We have an S Corp, and our accountant she had to put Brie as something and Thais as something, so she put...
Well, she had to have someone as the president and someone as the secretary.
And so she put Brie as president, which she claims is only because... alphabetically, the B comes before the T.
She just knew.
All I'm saying is...
she knew.
I kind of like Thais and Brie better. I'm going to start planting that seed. Thais Sky and Brie Seeley are here. I'm just teasing. Anyway, we're happy to be here. Happy to share with you some really good conversations today. Topics that are very, very appropriate, I think.
Yeah, we're going to get a little bit deeper into that in a second. But before we get started... As usual, we have a brilliant event coming up in March, and we would love for any of you in Los Angeles to join us. It is International Women's Day, which goes along very well with the conversation we're having on today's podcast as well. March 8th in Los Angeles, we are partnering with the Empowerista and Girl Talk Network to bring a really great night of not only celebration of women, but also conversations around all of the things we're all going through right now. You know, Thais and I are going to talk in a hot second about feminism, but like we're all experiencing some interesting shit in the world right now. Yeah. And it's really important that we get together and understand and see the different perspectives of the issue. And so we'll be doing that on March 8th in Los Angeles. You can check out our website.
Yeah, go to our website, theamplifycollective.com. It's right there on the front page. So you'll have quick access to go to the events, get your ticket. We're expecting a lot of people to show because it's something that's going to be really good and really juicy. And we would love to see you and give you a big hug if you're here in LA, or just fly to LA and join us. Why not?
You can come in for the day.
I mean, it's a beautiful city. It's sunny. It's warm. There's no reason for you not to come.
All right. So we are going to dive into, we are bringing on a little bit later, Desiree
Adaway, who is just a brilliant woman doing some incredible work in her space with activists. And so we wanted to share today a brief conversation before we bring Desiree on about feminism. And what does that really mean? How does it apply to you? What are your thoughts about feminism? This word carries a lot of weight with different people. And we kind of want to break down some of those conversations just to give you some things to think about. And then we'll bring Desiree on.
So to get started, we wanted to bring up one of our favorite websites, wikipedia.org.
We're so academic with our sources.
I know. Well, wait, if you guys you don't need to write that one down, but seriously get a pen out for later because Desiree has a ton, she's going to give you a ton of resources.
Yes.
Hopefully you already know what Wikipedia is and you don't need to write it down, but in the event that you don't, by all means, wikipedia.org.
Okay, and my boyfriend is a PhD student and he would abhor that we are referencing Wikipedia as a source in this conversation.
You know, when you Google a word, it's just the first thing that comes up.
I know.
Sorry, Mark. All right.
We love you.
So, just to give you an idea, you know, feminism takes on a whole lot of meanings and has a whole lot of things based on your perspective. But in the eyes of Wikipedia, feminism is...
I'm sorry. I'm sorry for offending all the people who are doing good work in feminism by referencing Wikipedia.
Feminism is a range of political movements, ideologies, and social movements that share a common goal: to define, establish, and achieve political, economic, personal, and social rights for women. This includes seeking to establish equal opportunities for women in education and employment.
So there's a lot of ideas about what feminism means. And I think right now we're kind of in this era where many people believe that there is no purpose in identifying ourselves as feminist, that we can support women's rights, we can support our rights, but we don't need to cling to this concept of feminism. And that really aligns with the millennial generation's desire to not be identified by certain concepts. Millennials are more likely to say, no, we're not environmentalists. No, we're not Republican or Democrats. We're not any of these social constructs, even though they may identify with these umbrella terms. They don't feel the need to identify themselves with these words, which is fine, whatever, not a big deal. The thing is, feminism gets bad rep as seen as bra burning, as this idea of not using beauty products and
hatred against men.
Yes, that's a huge one. And so we kind of want to demystify that a little bit, because both Brie and I are in a lot of feminist spaces having these conversations on an almost daily, what's the word? Daily basis, that's the word. And the fact of the matter is, that's not what feminist ideals in this era really represent. Of course, there are some exceptions to the rule, of course, but for the most part, the women that we see that really identify themselves as feminists are women who want women to be paid the same as men, who want to feel like they have equal representation in Congress.
Well, and I think more than anything, too, it's massive change against, the white patriarchy that this country was built on.
Yes.
I mean, our country was built on oppression. Our country was built on hatred. And so really, for me, being a feminist is standing up for things that are not, the white patriarchy that has permeated our culture with this hate, with this oppression since the day of its inception. Like, think about it. Our country was literally built by immediately attacking and killing a race of people. Like, that is how we landed in this country.
And we still are. We still oppress Native Americans. We still dishonor their rights in this country.
We basically, I hate to get too political about this whole thing, but if you're not a white man, that is your life. And this conversation that we're having with Desiree is about the intersectionality of all of these things, because for me to be a white feminist female looks different than her version of feminism, or
as a person of color,
or
an immigrant's version of feminist, or Native American. So it's basically looking at it like this. Our country, let's talk specifically US. Let's not get global right now. Let's just talk about the United States of America. Our country was built on white men, okay? White men came from England to this country to seek protection, to seek a different way of being. They were the power. They created systems of government. They created moral codes. They created systems to support them in their living. Now, I'm sure in their conversations, they had an inkling of thoughts about the women who were in this conversation.
Although probably not. Like, let's think about it. Women didn't have consideration back then.
Yeah. So now, 300 some years later, our system is still built with those moral codes. The Constitution was built by white men. Now, in the 300 years, we've made some amendments and some changes to update into the modern times, but all of those updates are by government officials who are predominantly white men to this day. Out of the, 45 presidents, we've had one black president. Out of those 45 presidents, we've had 0 women presidents. So that's not to say that, there's a gender battle of men versus women. It's just taking a step back and acknowledging that all of the systems that are put in place today were created by white men, which means that it makes sense that white men in this country have certain privileges, have certain thoughts and systems created to support them in their individualistic desires for success. The problem is, we started to notice that certain systems are not amendable to women's psychology because women have been for thousands of years oppressed, thousands of years believed that their role was simply in the household, that this was a designation by God, that God created women to be in the house. It's prevented us from having a voice in things that matter to us, like childcare, like reproductive care, like how the workplace can support women. And so this is really what the feminist issue is about here. It's about saying the system was built by a patriarchy. It's not supportive of women's psychology, of how women operate in the world. And if we are to have true equality, we need to make some changes. Do you see this? It's not we hate men. It's not that we're victims to men, although we sort of are because it's thousands of years of this, but that's okay. It's saying we now have the platforms, have the voice, have the power to start inviting change. And in order to invite change, we first have to acknowledge that there's a problem. And there is a problem.
And then you add on top of this, so we're going to be talking about a lot of different layers of things today. Yes, we're talking about the umbrella of woman, but then under that umbrella of woman, you start looking into people that weren't born a woman but identify as a woman, or different races as women, different ethnicities and religions, and all of these different things. And you have to take in so many different perspectives, because while I have a certain perspective as being of British descent and being very white, Thais has a different perspective of being of Brazilian descent and being Latina, and Desiree will be sharing her perspective of being a Black woman that she will tell you she has to fight every day. And so it's really just getting conscious and starting to have these conversations, starting to dive into this stuff that might be a little uncomfortable. Like, we are taught to not have these conversations.
And I have to say, I know a lot of us use the word women's empowerment as a construct to support women in actualizing their power and speaking up and making money and putting themselves out there. Now, the word empowerment actually comes from the context of supporting a whole society, a whole community. It's not about individual empowerment, it's about collective empowerment. But somewhere along the way, women have decided that we like the word empowerment and we're gonna attribute it now to personal development. But this is actually, and can be, highly offensive to those communities, those marginalized voices, where individual empowerment actually disempowers the community. And so just know, this is a word that I'm not saying you have to remove from your vocabulary, but as female entrepreneurs, we really have to notice and be careful of the language that you use and what we're really advocating for. Because we have, as white women, the privilege, really, of doing this self-actualizing work and stepping up because our system supports us in that capacity. So there's a lot of words that we throw around in the entrepreneurial world that is actually creates a pervasiveness of privilege without acknowledging that all women are not equal. All women should not be addressed as equal. And there's a lot of nuance in this conversation that is important for us to look at and be conscientious of and be intentional around.
So these are kind of conversations that Thais and I have been having privately, and as bringing amplification into the lives of other people, We want to start having these publicly. And so, if any of you listening have any topics or people that you think would be great for us to speak to about a range of these kinds of topics, deeper conversations that are really going to create an impact to, our culture and our national level, things like that, things that you want to get more educated on, any of those things, like please reach out to us and let us know, because we are truly committed to have more important conversations, have things that actually, move the needle forward in terms of collective empowerment and understanding and building more community between people, in a place that frankly seeks to divide us more and more every day.
Amplify is all about a community of people right now focusing in Los Angeles, but we have visions of global domination. So global communities and a community that is all of one color and one voice is simply not a community that has a substantial foundation that can actually introduce some really hard-hitting topics that are just not comfortable. And Brie and I've had to really look at, and this is something that we talked about as introduction to season 2, we really had to look at the guests that we had on season 1 and the conversations that we had on season 1. And while we loved those guests tremendously, when we looked back, we realized we had very little diversity. And this is dangerous. It's dangerous to have a platform like a podcast where we get tens of thousands of listeners a month to only be showing one voice, because it gives a skewed perspective that it's this one voice only that matters.
Yeah.
And it's not. It's simply not.
And Thais are learning alongside everyone else as well. Like, this stuff is a very new conversation to me. And so, we're opening up this space to start taking these explorations, diving into these topics, because it's important. And we're not doing it from a place of, we know. We don't know. We don't know shit.
We're figuring it out as we go.
Opening up this space to have these conversations so that we can all be in a space of collectively empowering one another together. So please reach out to us, give us any feedback. We'd love to hear it. And I think...
Well, I would just say one more thing before we bring Desiree on. It's just, we're willing to get uncomfortable. We're willing to get called in. We're willing to make mistakes, but we're not willing to not speak up anymore. We're not willing to stay quiet anymore in the real atrocities that are happening in our very own state. I know a lot of people, when it comes to these women's marches, express that they have absolutely no idea why we're marching, that we have all the rights that we want, that we're just whiny women, bitching and moaning, because we get to bitch and moan. And while I can honor that point of view, I guess, or not, I actually really can't honor it, but my higher self or something can honor, that everyone has a diverse point of view. We're not equal. We're not equal. We don't have the same equality of access of resources as men do. The fact that a bunch of men in Congress can delegate what I can do with my body. This isn't equality, people, and we really have to wake up to this. And so Brie and I are going to be speaking up a lot about this. We're going to get it wrong. We're going to get it wrong a lot. We're probably going to get called out a lot. We're going to have more difficult conversations a lot. But
we're open to that.
But we're going to do it.
We're so committed to this that we're going to do it. Like, I will straight up tell you, even before this conversation, I told Thais, I was like, I'm not educated enough on this stuff. I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. How are we supposed to lead an entire hour-long podcast on something that I don't feel educated enough to be speaking about to our audience? And here's the reality. I don't fucking know a lot about this stuff. I really don't. And I'm learning every day because it matters.
Yeah.
And so I'm so committed to this work that I am willing to tell you I'm showing up in all my imperfections. I can guarantee you someone's going to call me out, tell me I'm stupid, tell me I'm uneducated, all of those things. And I'm willing to go through that because these conversations need to be being had.
And we're going to get called in, and I invite that. We're going to be called in by women who care, who will tell us that something that we said was insensitive to them, or, we're going to get called in, and that's good too. We're inviting that too. And the only reason why we're saying this is because we want to, at least, if anything of our ignorance, we're showing you that you don't have to know everything in order to start learning, understanding, and speaking up. You don't have to know everything, but you do have to start speaking up. If we want to see true change, we need your voice. We need you to acknowledge the privilege that you get to carry. And Desiree would talk about how there's different privileges and that there's a different realm of privilege. And because you carry a certain color of your skin, you actually were given resources that people weren't, which means you now get to share those resources and get to share your knowledge with the world. So we're calling in something new. We're terrified. We're excited. We know that this is the right direction. This feels super aligned with us to be more diverse, to be more well-rounded for you and for us. And we will love your feedback, and you're gonna have a mind-blowing exploration with Desiree. We did, and we're excited to have her on.
Get your pen and pencils out. I'm telling you, so many resources. Get them out, write them down, read them all.
Yeah, and educate yourselves, okay?
Yeah.
We just given you like a 0.00001% of this conversation. Please go educate yourselves.
Yeah.
Please, 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 as intentional, beautiful, smart, spiritual women, go fucking do your homework.
And men.
And
like we're going to continue having these conversations, these imperfect conversations on our Facebook group as well. So please join us.
Yeah, beamplified.community. All right, let's bring Desiree on. Desiree is here with us. Welcome to our podcast, my love.
Hi, welcome. Thanks for having me.
So we'll give our listeners just an idea of a little bit of who you are. Desiree is a seasoned nonprofit consultant and facilitator. All of her presentations have a mix of thought-provoking content presented with humor and wit. When she teaches, she makes a point to connect with every person and create a safe space for their growth. She is known by staff, senior leadership, peers, and partners as being great at open, honest, and productive conversations. She is not afraid of addressing anything that gets in the way of great work. Her style is positive, approachable, engaging, service-oriented, and audience-centered.
I love it. So the way we like to start our podcast episodes, Desiree, is by asking this question, which is, what does it look like for you to live an amplified life?
You know, that's a really wonderful question, because a lot of people will tell you that I live an amplified life every day. My work is, I feel that in my role in my life, I have two core bodies of work that I'm willing to lay down my life for, and that is for the freedom and liberation of Black people, and that is for all women to be autonomous in their bodies and their lives. And for me, those are non-negotiables in any world that I live in. And so I, every day, through multiple mediums, through multiple ways, make sure that that message is clear in all the work that I do and all the interactions that I engage in. But that's very clear. My job here is to every day come forth and fight for the liberation and the freedom of Black people.
I love that. So how did you kind of decide or stumble upon, or your heart kind of expanded to this conversation and to knowing that this was the purpose that you were here to fulfill?
You know, it's interesting. So 25 years, actually 30 years, let's stop lying. 30 years in the nonprofit world, managing super large budgets, $30-40 million budgets, departments of 40, 50, 60 people, global departments. But at my heart, all of my work is about activism. It is about liberty. It is about freedom. It is about safety and security for marginalized voices. And so when I started the Adaway Group, my consulting and training firm, I started just doing more and more work around equity and inclusion. And how do we create welcoming organizations and businesses? What does that even look like? What does equality look like? What would it look like if we centered our businesses around some of these core pieces that are necessary for liberation? And that's self-love, self-esteem, balance, security, safety, joy, and some kind of spiritual base. And so I work with a lot of activists. I train a lot of activists. I help do strategy with a lot of activists around the country. And so every day, this is my work, and I know this clearly, and it's always been my work in some form or another.
So let's talk about activism a little bit, because there's some division happening right now, and also I think some confusion about it in our current climate. And so one, of course, like with the Women's March, there were a lot of people that came out and said, how dare you? This is ridiculous. Stop protesting. And then on the other hand, there's this whole group of us that actually did participate in it and want to step more into activism. But like for me, for myself, you know, aside from my business and my voice, I'm like, what do I do? Like, I don't know how to be an activist. So if someone, I guess I'm asking two separate questions. If someone wants to become an activist, like what are a few things that you recommend getting started? And then,
so
go ahead.
Let me answer that one. So when I say I work with activists, I mean, I work with activists. I work with people that this is their job. Organizing is their job.
Right.
Whether they get paid for that or that's just what they do. So a lot of folks who, who may be attorneys, but what they're really doing is they're spending their days really doing emergency response. So if an uprising breaks out, they are there to get people out of jail, to teach jail support, to teach how to do legal observation, to teach civil disobedience. So when I say I work with activists, I truly, literally work with activists.
Right.
Now, you can be an activist at heart. You can be an activist in the way you spend your money and resources and the way you talk about issues that are important to you. And I think that those kind of people are actually, it's quite funny because I do coaching as well. And I was trying to figure out like what kind of person is drawn to me, that it doesn't matter if they're literally working for Marvel and writing cartoons or they're working within an organization, as a project manager. The people that are drawn to me in my work are ultimately activists at heart. And they're really about building communities and real relationships that are transformational and not transactional. And they see equity as a part of all of as a core value of how they live their lives.
I think something you said that's really interesting is that activists and people who are activists at heart believe in building communities. And I feel the juxtaposition between that statement and what we often see in the quote unquote women's empowerment quote unquote field, where it's actually a lot of individual empowerment, where it's a lot about self improvement rather than community improvement. Can you speak a little bit to that difference?
Yeah, that's why I don't buy into it. I actually don't use the term empowerment anymore. Yeah. For me, if we can't build community, it's about building community. It's about who are you connected to. It's about how transformational are these relationships and not transactional. What you just talked about is only a transactional relationship.
I love that. And so, I know that a lot of the conversation when it came to the march that we just had, from the lens of marginalized voices, is that, well, this is great that you're marching for this, but I want to see you march when it matters to us, when our point of view is at stake. I want to see you at the Black Lives Matter marches. I want to see you right at the Dakota Pipeline access protests. Can you speak a little bit to that? Because I feel like a lot of women who felt very confident in their participation in the marches that happened on Inauguration Day, and now they're a little taken back that maybe that wasn't fully the result wasn't as intended, right? The result wasn't exactly what they had envisioned.
Well, there are a couple of things. It's why did you show up? So I did not go to the Women's March. I didn't go to DC. I didn't go to the one in the town where I live. I had never planned on going. Actually ended up having an event that day. So that didn't happen. But I also had made it a very conscious effort that I would not poo-poo any of the women marches, right? So I just let them happen because, one, I'm excited to see people get out and show their voices. It was problematic for me on a number of areas, and I kept that to myself. And so let me just take that back. I kept that to myself as much as I could. I made 2 comments on social media that got a lot of interesting responses. One response I made was because I saw a lot of my trans brother and sisters truly hurt by the signs that were focused on genitalia and body parts, right? And a lot of my trans brothers and sisters were just really felt left out and discouraged and sad. And so I made a comment and I said, for all of you who need me to say this, all pussies aren't pink, and not everybody that has one, and not every woman has one. And I said, for the folks who needed to hear this, I see you. So there was that. Mm-hmm. The other piece there is I never felt that what was happening in DC was ever, it was a parade for me. Mm-hmm. I knew that it was going to be and become this big celebration, which that's okay. We need joy in our lives. And if connecting for the first time in your life with other people that think like you, and that was super helpful. But for me, that symbol of that hat was always problematic because it left people out. But let me just say this. Most symbols are problematic, period, in any movement. So there was that piece. And again, Desiree was going to keep her mouth shut. I swear. I was going to be quiet and I was going to let people enjoy their day and their moment. And then I started seeing all these messages going, yay, we're good. Our march was good. It was successful because no one got arrested.
Yes, this is when I was hoping that you would address this.
And that's when I flipped over the table in my house and said, okay, I have to acknowledge this. So when I tell you I work with activists, I'm telling you I work with people who have been tear gassed in Baltimore and Ferguson and Chicago. I've helped to raise money for those activists to literally get bulletproof vests. I've worked with activists that we've had to get out of jail that got lost in the system and were in there instead of for 30 minutes for 3 days. So what you're telling me when you say that is that all those people that have literally laid their bodies on the line, and folks were coming, people in Ferguson are still protesting there daily. So when you say this, I'm like, so what do you think about the people in Baltimore and in Chicago? That they weren't successful? Mm-hmm. That somehow the way they protest was wrong? And so then I put out a Facebook post and I said, white women show up to protest and cops wear pussy hats. Black people show up to protest and cops wear riot gear.
I think this is so powerful, and I'm so glad that you brought this up. And really, it's the concept of intersectional feminism. And this is a concept that a lot of people are surprisingly unfamiliar with. I was there a few months ago. I didn't understand this concept, and I had to do my research. And now I'm starting to kind of be at awe at how I didn't know about this. Educate me, Desiree, if I'm speaking of this incorrectly, but my understanding of intersectional feminism is not to use this umbrella term of feminism, which means we're all equal and we're all fighting the same thing, but really remembering that women have different needs underneath the umbrella of feminism, and it's a much more educated conversation to have that intersection conversation of.
It is a super nuanced and complex conversation. So the term intersectionality was coined in 1989 by critical race scholar Kimberly Williams Crenshaw. And while she's not the first person to think of or do kind of academic work in the concept of intersectionality, lots of Black activists and feminists, Audre Lorde and other people, have done it before. She was the one that coined the term. And so what is it based on? Human lives cannot be explained by taking into account any single category. Yes. We all have multiple identities that we navigate the world. Gender, race, socioeconomic status. And as people lives are multidimensional and complex, these lived realities are shaped by different factors and social dynamics. So an example, one of the things I said during the women's marches, let's just be clear, we're all policed differently. White men are policed differently than Black men. We are policed based upon gender, race, socioeconomic class, orientation. We're all policed differently. And so to think that everyone felt safe at that march is utterly ridiculous. Because there are plenty of brown folks who marched, and plenty of them said, and I didn't feel safe there. Because plenty of them don't feel safe around the police under any circumstances. Plenty of white people feel that way too, right? So we can't make these assumptions about people's identities and how these identities are connected to systems and structures, to laws, to policies, to state government, to religious institutions, to media, right? And so all of our lives are shaped by the isms: colonialism, imperialism, racism, homophobia, ableism, patriarchy, and where and how these affect us, right?
Yeah.
Are what we need to be talking about.
Yeah.
So I was working with a client, and they're trying to figure out, they work with undocumented workers, and they're trying to figure out what's the plan? How do we get in front of what may be coming down the pike? And so it's literally having to make some decisions, like who's the most vulnerable of all of us in this community that we need to protect and defend daily? Is that undocumented? Is that undocumented trans people? Who? So I would ask your viewers, who's the most vulnerable in your communities? Because if they're safe, then you're safe.
I love that you brought that up, because my question is, of course, Thais has been educating herself on this a lot and sharing it all with me. But where does someone start in this conversation of intersectional feminism? If our listeners are listening to this, and this is literally the first time they've ever even conceptualized this concept, how do they move from that unconscious incompetence into more of a competency so that they can be having these conversations? Because these are really important conversations to be having in our world, especially now. Building those bridges, building those communities, like creating more understanding between all of us. So what is something, do you have a great resource or something to give our listeners to really...
Use the Google.
But what do we Google?
It's so much on intersectionality out there.
Yeah. And
it's a lot.
Well,
and so, one, who are you reading? What are you reading? Who are you following? If you're only following people that look like you and think like you, you're missing a whole bunch.
So do you have any specific recommendations? Because Google can be, my mom was looking up a sporting goods store once, and she typed Dick's into the search bar and clearly didn't get what she was looking for. So I just want to be clear, like if our women are using Google, what exactly should they be looking for? Are they just searching the umbrella term? Do you have specific recommendations?
So this is where I push back. So Audre Lorde talks about how we expect marginalized groups to educate us. We expect gay people to educate us about being queer. We expect trans people to educate us. We expect disabled people to educate us about what that means. And that takes so much energy away from them to do their work. And so I'm going to push y'all and say, yes, there are lots of things out there. One site is Everyday Feminism, has gobs of information around around these topics, but I'm going to say push yourself to do the research and do the work. That's what showing up means.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad that you're saying that, because it's also the conversation that I feel with with white men, is that
That's right.
I need to educate them on how they're, for thousands of years women have been oppressed, and it gets to be a little bit like, how, like, you can do the work, like you can go do the homework, like you can go see for yourself how your privilege has supported you up to this point. But I want to actually dive into something, Desiree, that you had a conversation with a woman named Heather Plett, and I'm calling her out because she wrote a post in a group that I'm obsessed with called How to Sell to Women Without Selling Them Out, created by a woman named Kelly Deals. And this is how I found you, Desiree. And the question that the topic of discussion that she shares is one that I would love for you to talk a little bit about. And I'll share the passage and then we can talk about it.
Sure.
The central premise of what you two discussed was that women of color don't have the luxury of being fragile, while white women have been conditioned to believe that if we are fragile, we will receive the protection of the establishment. While people of color are controlled by force, white women are controlled by keeping us fragile and giving us cookies for performing well. If white women dare to step out of their fragility, they are threatened and their protection is taken away. Hence the number of white women who voted for Trump. And so I would love for you to talk a little bit more about that, specifically for the listeners who may not even know what white women fragility is, and how can we build or remove some of that fragility so that we can be more likely to step out of this quote unquote protection and support people of color.
Sure. So white fragility was also it started out as an academic term, but it's become more widely used. So it's a state in which even the minimum amount of racial stress becomes intolerable or triggering and leads to a bunch of defensiveness. So this could be people being angry because you're talking about race, or fearful, or feel guilt, and or silence you, and they've just become so stress-inducing for white people because, again, not your fault, but we live in a structure and a system that has made it so that you don't have to think about race, nor talk about race, nor deal with it, unless you want to, and under the circumstances that you prefer. Mm-hmm. Whereas I navigate and deal with race all day long, every day, and have been taught this since I was a kid. And so I get it, right? Like I understand that I can say something and people are like, that kind of hurt my feelings, or that kind of hurt my feels. I will give you this article. There's Dr. Robin DiAngelo she's a white woman who's a professor, and she talks a lot about what that means to be so fragile. And so there are a couple of things. When people of color talk directly about their own racial perspective, a lot of people have been taught not to believe it. So it's just like you were talking about with men. They're like, I don't see that.
That's not me, right? Like, I've never carried that privilege.
I don't understand. I've never seen that happen, right?
I didn't vote for Trump, right?
Right. It's the same thing when you talk about race, right? And so a lot of white people have been taught that talking about race is taboo. Y'all were taught the whole I don't see race, right? Mm-hmm. There's a generation of folks who came up and their parents very explicitly told them not to see race. And so when we talk about fragility, we talk about thinking about all the ways, and when I tell you a story about me being hurt by some racial comment or something that happened, then it somehow becomes about you being upset, and then it's no longer about me, the person who was actually hurt by it.
Yes, and I see this a lot in my work. I do a lot of work with people who have experienced trauma of any capacity, and it's amazing at how when they're sharing their trauma to someone who may not be able to hold space for them, the person wants to immediately make it be about them and how they're sharing their trauma is affecting them, right? And so then they immediately want to go into quote unquote fix it mode and help them mode, which inherently makes them feel better about themselves without actually holding compassion and empathy for that person's experience.
And I don't talk about racism and white supremacy. I don't talk about it on the individual level.
Yeah.
I talk about it on the systemic level. So segregation is real. Most white people live, grow, play, learn, love, work, and die primarily in white spaces, social and geographically racial segregated places. That wasn't on accident.
Yeah.
If you do history, redlining and buying homes in certain neighborhoods were not allowed. Right? So, but what happens is society doesn't teach you, this is what Dr. D'Angelo will tell you, society doesn't teach you that it's actually your loss that you didn't grow up in more diverse spaces. Mm-hmm. What happens is that you lose nothing of value by having no cross-racial relationships. I, as a Black woman, have to have cross-racial relationships. I have to know everything about you so that I can navigate this world safely. Mm. So we have a society that will tell you the whiter your neighborhoods and schools, the more likely, this is not for everybody and not it, but across this country, the more likely that's seen as good. Good schools, safe schools. Right?
Yeah.
Segregation is one of them. The whole concept of individualism. Y'all are taught to see yourself as individuals rather than part of a racial group. So whatever you have in your life, you've gotten because you've worked hard for it. Right? The whole myth of meritocracy. Mm-hmm. And that enables us to deny that racism is structured and built into the fabric of the society. And this is where people get really angry.
Yeah.
Because are there poor white people? Of course there are. Right? So what intersectionality teaches us is that people can experience privilege and oppression simultaneously. Mm-hmm. I am college educated. I've lived and traveled all over the world. I make 6 figures. I am amazingly privileged. But I am always a Black woman navigating this world. And there are things that I have to fight every day, no matter how rich I am, no matter how much money I have, no matter what space I'm in, that's the reality. You can be a rich white woman and still have some man call you sugar and pinch you on your ass.
So, you know, we, as living an amplified life, we believe that we all have a responsibility within all of these conversations. And so if you could gift our listeners with some sort of call to action, like, you know, obviously we talked about learning more about this, but what now? Like, how do each of us make change in these spheres? How do each of us show up for one another in a more powerful way?
I think this is where the patriarchy comes into play. I have a lot of women who tell me I don't know what to say. And I always say, yes, you do. You know exactly what to say, but you've been taught not to say it.
Yes.
So in the dominant position, white people spend most of their life racially comfortably. And don't have any unchallenged expectations for that to change. I need y'all to stop being so fragile.
Yes.
I need you to build up your tolerance for racial discomfort. I need you to have more difficult conversations. I need you to actually build relationships, transformational ones, not transactional ones, with people of different genders, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation. You don't have to do them all tomorrow. Pick one.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
That's beautiful.
But understand that your racial comfort is never more important than my safety and liberation. Yeah. And that's what I call people out on every day.
Mm-hmm. One more thing I want you to add is about your conversation of safe space versus brave space. Bree and I are actively going to start building brave space, and I would love for you to talk a little bit about that concept.
So I do some online classes, and one online class is it's called Diversity is an Asset, and I do it with this amazing woman named Erica Hines, who's also a trainer and facilitator in diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And you know, we people are always talking about, what do? I need to learn more, and so we created this 4-week online class, and it's not my concept. It's again, I go to academia for stuff. It's from the academic space, and that you can find, and that more and more professors are using in classrooms. And so people are always like, are you going to give us a safe space? And Eric and I said, you know, we, of our combined 30 plus years, when people talk about safety, they're actually talking about having a status quo environment that lets them stay where they are. And what they're saying is, please make us feel comfortable and about being involved in diversity, and please don't make us feel bad. Mm-hmm. And please just, you know, hold my hand. And so I am absolutely interested in moving people forward because that's what the commitment to this work takes. I need everybody, right? Intersectionality is ultimately about social justice. It's about building coalitions. It's about it's transformative work. So I want all of us to get there, because I say it all the time. We got to get free together. I don't get free alone. We all have to get free together. And so I appreciate when people take personal and emotional risk by doing this work. But real learning happens when you're pushed, right? When we have open conversations, when we encourage participation, that is in a respectful environment, but one that pushes you to be brave. While I'll always have a safe space for people, where people are physically safe, I don't feel the need to have I need every space to be brave, so that we can have difficult conversations around race, class, and gender, and get to where we need to get to. A great book for your folks is Sarah Schulman, Conflict is Not Abuse. Because I think we, again, in the fragileness, we equate having a difficult conversation with being physically and, you know, unsafe. Yeah. And sometimes that is true, right? If we have, so I'm not discounting that there are that triggers things in those of us who've been abused. But I'm going to say that if that is not your reality, and you immediately want to shut down from having these conversations, I want you to push yourself and ask why.
Yeah, I'm seeing in the white spaces a lot of this conversation about, right now anyway, on be positive, focus on positivity, don't use words like no, you know, and while that may be coming from a good intention, I'm feeling that the underlying unconscious thing is fragility of not being able to handle anger and frustration and the real conflict and conversations that are going on right now. And so wanting to sugarcoat it with positivity, so you don't actually have to look at what's going on in people's backgrounds that aren't their own.
Yeah, so even though I said I wasn't going to do the work for y'all, I am going to give you another one.
Okay. I'm writing all these down, so they're all going in our show notes. So for anyone,
I said I wasn't going to carry your water for you. I am going to give you another one.
Thank you.
And everybody that I coach with, anybody that coaches with me, I give them the book, Audre Lorde, Sister Outsider.
Yes. Audre
And she
Lorde.
has very clear writings about anger and the use of anger in this movement. And people are so funny. They always are like, how do you get through it? And I'm like, oh, I stay angry. I stay angry all day long. I stay at a nice simmer.
Nice simmer.
I do. I don't watch a lot of movies, hardly any, but I actually have seen the Avengers movie. And in it, when they're like, okay, Hulk, we need you to turn into the Hulk, right? Like, we need you angry. And he looks at them and he says, see, that's it. I stay angry. And I stay angry because my anger is righteous and nobody can tell me different.
Yes.
Well, I just want to say thank you for coming on and sharing this conversation with us, and for bearing a little bit of the burden and giving us some resources as well. We very much appreciate it. And this is something that Thais and I are both really committed to diving into more, and we just couldn't be more grateful that you said yes. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
And for everyone else who wants to stay angry with you,
I have no problem with angry folks. So
amazing.
Come hang with me.
Where can people find out more about you and the beautiful work that you're doing in the world?
So if you go to DesireeAdaway.com, DesireeAdaway.com, you can get my newsletter where I do writings around, I've been doing more and more writings around this right now. People tell me I'm prolific on social media. And you can find me on Twitter. I usually fight on Twitter and then kind of educate on Facebook. So whatever you're into that day, you can come find me. I usually I go to Twitter to just jump in the fray because I love it. But I'll tell you one thing about Twitter. People like Twitter's like a mess. I follow journalists and writers and thinkers on Twitter, and I get all the best information.
Nice.
I love it.
All the best.
Cool. For those of you that want more of our conversation with Desiree, we are going to hop over into our Facebook community now and do a little extended cut with some juicy questions. So you can hop on over there at http beamplified.community. That is not .com, that is .community.
And that's it. Thank you, everybody, for joining us in this conversation. As always, you can find us on all the social media platforms, starting to become angrier and angrier as the conversation grows. And you can find us at the Amplified Co. Now go be amplified, go be your best educated selves. We need you to rise up.
See you all next week.